When I opened the video, there was Bob on the screen, waving at us with a cheerful voice.
Having fun with zero guests?
My dad, George, and I watched it in silence.
You guys enjoy your father-daughter time. We're over here having a blast too.
With those words, the camera panned out, capturing the entire scene. There, lined up in a row, were the co-workers who were supposed to attend today's wedding.
I heard you're getting divorced. Bummer.
Catherine, come on, you're a stay-at-home wife and still cheated. No wonder he's fed up with you.
The co-workers were saying things that I had no recollection of. Their faces twisted into gleeful smirks, like they had just found a new toy to play with. Bob must have orchestrated this. Apparently, they've been told I was the one who cheated. Dad, I'm really sorry.
I was so looking forward to seeing him. I thought we'd finally get the chance.
As my dad murmured, I smiled while fiddling with my phone. Don't worry, we're going to see them now. They started the fight, after all. Get ready for what's coming. I'm Catherine Johnson, 29 years old. 6 months ago, I married my boss, Bob, who is 5 years older than me, and we officially became husband and wife. Next month, we're supposed to have our wedding, and things have been pretty chaotic. Next month, I'm nervous, but I'm also excited to finally meet Bob's parents. A lot of couples meet each other's parents before their wedding, right? But not us. Bob's parents live overseas. It felt wrong to ask them to come all the way here just for a meet and greet. But it was also difficult for us to travel overseas. So we decided we'd meet at the wedding instead and get it all done at once. By the way, my mom passed away when I was in high school, so it's just my dad and me. He lives in the same town as I do. When I told him about my marriage, he was so happy.
What kind of guy is he? I can't wait to meet him.
Dad was full of curiosity about Bob. Along with his happiness, he also seemed a little worried. After all, I'm his only daughter, and he'd want to know the man she's marrying. Since my dad lived in the same town, I thought we could at least have a meal together on one of Bob's days off. I suggested this to Bob, hoping it would ease my dad's mind, but he flatly refused.
No way. What are you thinking? You won't meet my parents, but I have to meet yours.
I'm sorry. My dad's just really eager to meet you, so I thought we could have a simple meal.
Was that too complicated for you? I said it's favoritism. It's unfair. It doesn't make sense for me not to meet my parents, but to meet your dad. Use your brain.
I'm sorry. When he bombards me with words like that, I can't help but apologize. This isn't the first time. I quit my job when we got married, but even back when we were boss and a team member, Bob and I often clashed like this. Apparently, I'm naive, and Bob always scolds me for it. His words can be harsh, and at first they scared me, but in my whole life, no one had ever scolded me like this. Maybe that's what felt new and refreshing to me.
Everyone is spoiling you, but is that really okay? I believe in you, Catherine. I know you can do better. That report you worked on the other day was great. You nailed it.
Oh, thank you. Back then, despite his strictness, there was some kindness, and since Bob was always helpful and supportive, I gradually fell for him. Eventually, Bob confessed his feelings to me, and we got married. Yes. Before we got married, he had his gentle moments, but recently, all I hear is scolding. Especially since I became a stay-at-home wife, just like he wanted. His attitude toward me has gotten even worse. I remember the early days of our marriage. As soon as Bob would come home, he'd sigh as he looked around the room.
You've been home all day. So why isn't this place cleaned up?
I'm sorry. I was busy with the wedding gift thank yous today. At that time, I was still trying to unpack from the move while keeping up with household chores. Even so, I was trying to get everything done on time, but Bob didn't seem to understand.
You always have excuses. That stuff should take no time at all.
But there are so many, and I'm trying to personalize them depending on who they're for. It's not something I can just rush through. I know I can be indecisive, but since I was in charge of all the thank yous, even for Bob's side, I wanted to make sure everything was appropriate. Also, since we both work at the same company, there were a lot of professional relationships to consider. For the sake of his future, I thought it was important to handle the thank yous and greetings carefully. I tried to explain this to Bob, doing my best not to upset him. But when I finished, he just sighed in exasperation.
You just love giving long-winded explanations. In the end, you're just inefficient. All you need is a generic message.
In the end, as always, all I could do was apologize profusely. Bob dumped all the annoying tasks on me, but when it came to the wedding, he was oddly particular and took charge.
A wedding is just a formality. We'll invite our parents and work colleagues only. Friends can join us for a meal later.
I wanted to invite my friends if possible, but I knew Bob didn't have many. He was a very proud man, so he would never admit he didn't have anyone to invite. Yeah, that sounds fine. And so, with Bob at the helm, the wedding plans progressed smoothly. The preparations were going well, and I was starting to see some light in our uncertain married life. After learning Bob's routines, things became a little easier. I still got scolded, but knowing what to expect made it more manageable. When Bob came home, the first thing he'd do was scan the room. If the house wasn't cleaner than it was when he left in the morning, I'd brace myself for sharp comments. Then he'd head straight to the bath. After his bath, I'd have to make sure a chilled coffee and a freshly made dinner were ready. From there, it was a gamble. I thought I was a decent cook and even enjoyed it. But everyone has different tastes. With Bob, it wasn't just his preferences, but also his mood that complicated things. If he liked the food, he'd eat quietly, but if something wasn't to his liking, I'd have to listen to complaints.
Sure, I said I like strong flavors, but as my wife, you should be thinking about your husband's health too, right? Just making everything salty isn't the answer. Like this soup, it's way too strong.
Bob pointed at the soup. I had carefully made the broth, using fewer seasonings. But I knew if I tried to explain that, he'd just accuse me of making excuses again. I'm sorry. I'll be more careful. Apologizing was the quickest way to keep the peace. Bob often brought home colleagues or his team members, but those times were actually easier. He was too concerned about appearances to nag like usual. As long as I made sure to host properly, everyone would praise him, which kept him in a good mood.
Catherine, you're such an amazing wife. Bob, you really hit the jackpot.
Well, she's still got a lot to learn, but she's doing a great job. Thanks for everything, Catherine.
You two are such a sweet couple. I bet Catherine treats you so well because you're always so nice to her, Bob.
All I could do in those moments was smile awkwardly. The truth was, I got scolded constantly, and we were far from a sweet couple. Honestly, I'd thought about divorce before, and even now, it crosses my mind frequently. However, when I thought about how happy my dad was just from the news of my marriage, I couldn't go through with it. If his daughter were to get divorced in less than a year, it might embarrass him. I didn't want to see him disappointed either. All I had to do was try harder to meet Bob's expectations. If I could become better at being a housewife, he'd surely appreciate me again like before. That's what I told myself as I endured each day. But just a week before the wedding, I discovered Bob had been cheating. A close friend of mine, who was also his coworker, caught Bob flirting with an unfamiliar woman in a hotel hallway. They made eye contact, and my friend instinctively nodded at him. Bob, looking awkward, nodded back. He must have known my friend would tell me. As soon as he got home, Bob called me over, saying, "We need to talk."
You already know, right?
I didn't have to ask what he meant. I nodded slowly.
I don't know how you heard it, but it was just a fling. Don't even think about suing me or anything, okay?
Excuse me? That's not something you just say. I couldn't help but look at him. Even if it was a fling, cheating is still cheating, right? I mean, you're married to me, and you expect me to just ignore it? There's no way I could accept that. As I trembled with anger, Bob looked at me with cold eyes.
But you don't have proof, do you?
What?
No proof, no cheating.
It's true that my friend only saw the two of them flirting. She didn't capture any decisive moment on camera, nor did she record any audio of their conversation.
All I did was have a little too much physical contact with a female friend. Your buddy just happened to walk by at the wrong time. You can't call that cheating based on that, can you? Impossible.
He scoffed.
If you really want to get divorced, I'll let you. But just know that you'll be the one paying alimony and covering the cancellation fees for next week's wedding.
The cancellation fees.
Yeah, it'll be a hefty sum. I bet your dad will be really disappointed too, after all the effort he put into raising you.
Seeing me fall silent, Bob's eyes narrowed in amusement.
There's no way you or your dad could afford that kind of money, right? So, you know what you need to do, don't you? Think about how to handle this smoothly.
Bob clearly thought I couldn't do anything. He wasn't anxious, nor did he show any signs of regret. He acted like everything was normal in the days that followed. My family is only my dad. I don't have enough money either. He must have believed that his obedient wife would never dare to stand up to him. And then the wedding day arrived. When I woke up, Bob was already gone. Instead, there was a message on my phone.
I've already headed out.
I read it and took a deep breath. The day had finally come. All right, it's time to go. I grabbed my phone and stood up. As planned, I met my dad at the wedding venue, and together we greeted the staff. Then something unexpected happened. Bob, who had left earlier, hadn't arrived yet. Even as the scheduled time passed, Bob still hadn't shown up. Not only that, but there were no guests in sight either. In the middle of all this, I received a video message on my phone. It's from Bob. With my dad watching over me, I opened the video. Bob appeared right away, grinning from ear to ear. He waved at the camera and said in a playful voice,
Having fun with 0 guests?
My dad and I watched in silence.
You two enjoy your father-daughter time. We're all having a blast over here.
With those words, the camera panned out, capturing the whole scene. There, lined up in a row, were the co-workers who were supposed to attend today's wedding.
I heard you're getting divorced. Tough luck.
Catherine, come on, even as a stay-at-home wife, you can't cheat and expect him to stick around.
Some random jabs came from the group. They all seemed to be in high spirits, probably because of the alcohol.
Canceling the wedding last minute is insane. Bob's revenge is terrifying.
She deserved it. I mean, cheating while your husband is supporting you. That's just messed up.
The coworkers were saying things that I had no recollection of. Their faces twisted into gleeful smirks, like they had just found a new toy to play with. Bob must have fed them this story. Apparently, over there, I was the one who cheated.
And so, since I'm so heartbroken by your infidelity, I'll be getting some comfort from everyone here. We'll discuss the alimony and divorce through my lawyer. Until then, take care.
The video abruptly ended. I got the gist of what had happened. Bob had manipulated the story, causing all my coworkers to bail on the wedding. Dad, I'm really sorry. I felt terrible for dragging him into this mess. If only I had been better at judging people. When I turned around, I saw my dad, his eyes wide with anger, trembling with rage.
I was so excited to finally meet him.
I started fiddling with my phone, then gave my dad a reassuring smile. It's okay. Let's go see him now. I knew exactly where Bob was. As the concerned staff watched us leave, my dad and I exited the venue. We headed straight for a garden restaurant nearby. As we approached, we could hear the loud, rowdy voices from outside. I pushed open the door forcefully, and all eyes immediately turned to us. The once loud chatter started to die down until the room fell completely silent. The first person to speak was Bob.
Catherine, what are you doing here?
His lips trembled as he stammered. I had never seen him this rattled before. Behind him were the same coworkers from the video. I smiled slightly and turned to face Bob. Don't you think it's unfair for you to be having all the fun without me? Besides, we still have plenty to discuss, don't we?
That's not the point. How did you even know I was here?
You don't have to be so scared. Did you forget, Bob? Back when we first started dating, we installed a GPS app on each other's phones. All I had to do was check that. Bob's eyes widened in realization as he quickly pulled his phone from his pocket, fumbling with it in a panic. It looked like he was frantically trying to delete the GPS app. It's too late for that now.
You, doing something like this is practically criminal. It's so sneaky.
Didn't you suggest, no, force me to install this app in the first place? You said it was necessary to keep track of where I was and what I was doing. How could you forget? Bob hated being controlled, but had no problem trying to control me. Back then, I thought that was Bob's way of showing love, so I didn't push back. But looking back now, it was clearly wrong.
That's...
Behind Bob, I could hear my coworkers whispering to each other.
Oh my God, GPS? Isn't that a bit much?
No wonder Catherine cheated on him. With that kind of control freak.
It seemed Bob heard them too. His face flushed bright red. I ignored him and calmly pulled a file filled with dozens of photos out of my bag. Then I threw it into the air with force. The photos fluttered through the air above, catching everyone's attention. All eyes turned to see what was happening. My coworkers, curious, picked up the photos with confused looks, only for their eyes to widen in shock.
What's this?
Bob, grabbing one of the photos, stared at it with disbelief.
What the hell is this?
Isn't it obvious? These are some pretty good shots, don't you think? They show you and Ashley Thompson getting all lovey-dovey.
Why? How did you even get these?
Well, you said it yourself, didn't you? Without proof, it's not considered cheating. So here's your proof. Thanks to the way you looked down on me, it was easy to get these. Normally, people don't go on dates so carefree after getting caught cheating. Oh, or maybe you were just that confident since you were already planning for divorce? Either way, it was pretty reckless. Bob glared at me, his face still red. These photos had been taken after I found out about his cheating. I had hired a private investigator to capture them. The investigator had told me it was surprisingly easy.
There wasn't much caution on his part. It seemed like he was totally confident nothing would happen.
Even the investigator had been baffled. Bob never imagined I'd be considering divorce. So he figured I'd never go as far as to investigate him. You really underestimated me. Oh, and by the way, I'll be sending Ashley an alimony claim as well. I've already got her name and workplace. Neither of you can escape. The atmosphere started to shift. My coworkers began looking uneasy.
Wait, so Bob's the one who cheated?
Does that mean Catherine's the victim here?
A few faces started to turn pale. They were beginning to realize that their actions had been wrong. Bob may have planted the idea, but they had ultimately chosen to cancel the wedding last minute as a joke. Even if they looked at me now, begging for forgiveness, I had no reason to grant it. On the contrary, many of them awkwardly averted their eyes from me. Slowly, they started to drift away, leaving Bob standing alone. I walked over to him and handed him the divorce papers and a pen. Bob stared at the papers for a moment, then shot me a hateful glare. With a click of his tongue, he snatched them from my hand. Stomping over to a nearby table, he furiously filled out the divorce papers. Everyone around us watched with a mix of discomfort and awkwardness, unsure of what to say.
There. Happy now?
He finished and threw the papers and pen at my feet. I picked them up and carefully checked for any missing signatures. His handwriting was angry and messy, but it was all there. Yep, looks good.
Damn it. Are you satisfied putting me on display like this? You planned on divorcing me from the start and went through all this trouble just for show.
Well, you were the one who ditched the wedding without a word. I didn't plan on taking it this far either. Originally, I was just going to declare the divorce and have a meeting another day. That's right. I never intended to have a wedding today. So when Bob didn't show up on time, I wasn't all that surprised. My plan was to announce the divorce and then leave with my dad. It would have been awkward for the guests, but since it was only our parents and work colleagues, I figured we could just send them home with their gifts and let them enjoy the reception. The venue staff already knew about this in advance. They were confused at first, but with my dad's help, they agreed to accommodate us. I didn't intend to spread those photos of you and your affair either. But when I heard you'd been telling everyone that I was the one who cheated, I couldn't just let that slide. Bob averted his eyes, clearly feeling guilty. At that moment, my dad, who had remained silent, cleared his throat and strode purposefully toward Bob. When he reached him, he took off the hat he'd been wearing low over his eyes and gave Bob a piercing glare.
Well, Bob, this is the first time we've met in person, isn't it? I can't believe you hurt my daughter like this. You've done enough damage. I hope you're ready to face the consequences.
Consequences? You're blowing this way out of proportion. I know you want me to pay alimony for cheating, but the marriage and the affair weren't even that long. It won't be much. I'll pay up.
Bob was tall, but my dad was taller. Even though Bob tried to act tough, his eyes avoided my dad's, drifting downward.
Catherine tells me you don't have much in savings. You might want to start looking for a new job to pay that alimony.
What are you talking about? Sure, I don't have savings, but I don't need a new job. Catherine, your dad's crazy.
Bob looked up at my dad with a sneer, but then his expression froze.
Wait, George? Why are you here?
It was no surprise that Bob was stunned. Who wouldn't be, realizing that the dad of the bride he just ditched was his company's CEO? Bob's face was drained of all color, but he wasn't the only one turning pale.
What's going on? The real question is, how did I end up with so many idiots working for me?
As my dad glared around the room, the coworkers flinched, their shoulders jerking and their bodies stiffened. They were like frogs frozen under the gaze of a snake.
Wait, no, George. We were deceived by Bob.
That's right. Bob told us he wanted revenge because Catherine cheated on him. He begged for our help, so we had no choice.
At those words, the people around nodded so vigorously it looked like their heads might fall off. Everyone was desperate to save themselves. They began offering excuses at once.
We were victims too. We didn't know the truth.
It's all Bob's lies.
Their desperate justifications echoed through the room. But as my dad stood there, silently glaring at them, their frantic explanations started to fade until the room felt completely silent. The one who looked the most terrified, of course, was Bob. Unlike his coworkers, he didn't even try to defend himself. He just stood there, paralyzed. Finally, the first words he managed to utter were a weak, barely audible apology.
I'm sorry.
Bob was proud and always confident. I never imagined hearing such a small voice from him. Oh, so you do know how to apologize after all. I thought you were too stubborn to ever admit you were wrong. When I smiled sweetly and spoke, I heard the sound of teeth grinding. It was Bob clenching his jaw. After looking down on me for so long, it must have been unbearable for him to hear me say something like that. But with my dad, the CO, standing right there, he didn't dare show any defiance. Well, shall we go, Dad? I beckoned to my dad, who nodded gently and followed me out.
Yeah,
As we made our way toward the exit, everyone just stared in stunned silence, unable to stop us. When we reached the door, my dad suddenly paused, turned around as if he had remembered something.
oh right. I was going to send out an official notice tomorrow, but I might as well tell you all here, for those of you present.
Someone gulped loudly.
All 80 of you are fired.
The moment my dad declared that, everyone gasped in shock. The reactions varied. Some people panicked, others were left speechless, and a few had tears in their eyes. Bob was surrounded by the male employees.
You idiots. It's your fault for falling for it.
I heard him shout those words. Meanwhile, most of the female employees, realizing they had no chance of persuading my dad, turned to me pleading.
Catherine, please. I'm so sorry. I'll apologize. Just please talk to your dad. I don't want to lose this job. I love working here.
I worked so hard to get in here. Getting fired over something this stupid is unbelievable.
They cried and begged me. It's true, our company had a great reputation. We had excellent benefits, 2 full days off a week, paid overtime, and vacation time that didn't require explanations. Not to mention, the pay was above the industry average. Being kicked out of such a desirable workplace because they no-showed the CEO's daughter's wedding? Anyone would think that was ridiculous. I understand. You all just got caught up in the moment and believed Bob's ridiculous lies without questioning them, right?
Exactly. You get it, Catherine.
Some of the women smiled in relief, thinking they were off the hook. I gave them a sympathetic smile and replied, "But I'm afraid that if this were to work, it would be considered a serious mistake. If you're gullible enough to believe a competitor's lies without verifying them, that's a huge problem. If our company were to suffer because of that, it'd be a disaster." Their smiles froze, and they stood there, dumbfounded.
Yeah, But if it's someone like Bob who we trust, I mean, we'd believe him, right?
They were still trying to pin it all on Bob. But these were grown adults. Blaming someone else entirely wasn't going to cut it. Well, maybe next time you should check if the information is actually true before acting on it. Canceling a wedding last minute is a big deal. Why didn't you think it through? The women who had been so eager to explain themselves earlier were now completely speechless. Meanwhile, over by Bob, the male employees were starting to shout angrily.
This is your fault. None of this would have happened if you hadn't started it.
Yeah. How are you going to fix this?
They looked like they were about to throw punches. Bob's eyes darted around in a panic.
Wait, hold on.
He shouted.
I know I messed up by my lying, but I had no choice. Ashley said she wouldn't be satisfied otherwise.
Ashley was Bob's mistress. His admission that he had dragged everyone into this mess just to please her only fueled the employees' rage further. It was like pouring gasoline on a fire. Bob, who was irritated, turned to his angry colleague and said,
But I said I'll take responsibility, didn't I? Don't worry. I'll talk to Ashley. She'll figure something out for us.
Puffing out his chest as usual, Bob added loudly,
After all, Ashley is the daughter of the CEO of our rival company. I'm going to marry her. Once I tell her we've broken up, she'll be more than happy to hire all 80 of you.
The room, still simmering with anger, suddenly filled with a mix of confusion and anticipation. Bob turned to my dad and me with a smug grin.
So, there you have it. Things won't go the way you planned. I'll be your competition from now on.
Bob was overly excited, completely carried away by his delusions. When my dad and I exchanged glances, we both gave a slightly troubled smile. I felt a little sorry for him, but it seemed only kind to finally tell him the truth. Actually, during the affair investigation, we looked into Ashley too. She's not a CEO's daughter.
No way.
The glimmer in Bob's eyes faded again, just as quickly as it had returned. She's just an employee at a regular nightclub. You've been tricked.
That's a lie. It can't be. She told me herself, and she even had a CEO's business card.
She probably got it when one of the customers came in. Besides, our rival company's CEO's last name is Wilson, not Thompson.
Whoa.
Bob probably knew that much, but he'd been so caught up in the idea of becoming the next CEO that he had completely forgotten. Too bad, huh? But don't worry, she seems pretty well connected in the nightlife industry. You might find a new job faster than you think. Good luck. I couldn't help but offer him a few encouraging words, feeling a little sorry for how naive and foolish he had been. But it seemed my words didn't reach him. Bob stumbled and sank to the ground, staring blankly into space. Taking advantage of the situation, my dad and I quickly left the venue. A few desperate employees tried to follow us, but they backed off when my dad gave them a sharp glare. Afterward, my dad seriously considered firing all 80 employees involved. However, in today's world, it wasn't as simple as that. In the end, though, most of them chose to quit on their own. Why? Because my dad sent out a detailed report with real names, making sure everyone in the company knew about the wedding no-shows. As a result, word spread quickly, and those involved became outcasts within the company. They were ignored not just by their coworkers, but also by clients, and their performance plummeted. Of course. No one wants to trust a job to someone who goes along with things without verifying the facts. As a result, their pay was cut and they were reassigned to less desirable roles. In a situation like this, there was no hope for improvement, even after a transfer. The employees who thought that way probably decided it would be better to resign. As for Bob, he hung on until the end. But eventually, he was caught trying to embezzle company funds and was fired. The once confident man I had married was now nothing more than a gaunt, haggard old man. Needless to say, I never met his parents, but they did agree to pay the alimony on his behalf. In return, Bob was disowned. It turns out he had never intended to invite his parents to the wedding in the first place and hadn't even told them about it. Despite my efforts to prepare the invitations, he hadn't bothered to invite any higher-ups from work either. He had only invited co-workers and his team members he could boss around. Naturally, I also filed a claim for alimony against his mistress, Ashley. At first, Ashley put up a lot of resistance, but it turned out she had a daytime job at another company. When I mentioned my dad, she became afraid of pressure being put on her employer and agreed to pay the alimony in a lump sum. Since she can't get any more money from Bob, it seems she has no intention of meeting him again in the future. What started as what I thought was a dream romance turned into an absolute nightmare. As for my dad, he's now determined to find me a trustworthy partner for my next marriage. But honestly, I'm not interested. Maybe I'll change my mind in the future, but for now, I find more joy in my work. Eventually, I hope to be in a position to take over my dad's company. That's why I've worked so hard, keeping my background a secret for as long as I could. Now that the truth is out, I've embraced it and am continuing to work. On a side note, if I can't grow into the role of successor, my dad plans to hand the company over to someone he trusts. I'd rather see the company thrive under a capable leader than watch it crumble because of my own pride. That said, I do want to be the one to carry on my dad's legacy. For now, I'll keep learning and working to earn his trust.